Hello, everyone. Russia has fulfilled its promise to respond harshly and quickly. Last night, critical infrastructure in Ukraine was targeted. It was the most powerful strike of the entire special military operation. The Russian Ministry of Defense officially confirmed it. High-precision, long-range weapons, both ground and sea-based, were used, including a hypersonic missile system, medium-range Oreshnik, hypersonic zircons, Kinzhals, and hundreds of Garand strike drones. But most importantly, for the first time, Oreshnik was used not against industrial facilities, but against a facility in Lviv, where, according to Russian intelligence, a command post and logistics base of the U.S. Armed Forces were located. This is a direct response to the seizure of the Mariner tanker and the detention of Russian citizens. The time for warnings is over. Russia has moved to direct action against NATO infrastructure in Ukraine. And this is just the beginning. Today, we will analyze the entire operation from the moment the decision was made to the results of the strike. We will find out exactly what was destroyed in Lviv and why the use of Oreshnik against an American facility is an unprecedented escalation. And most importantly, we will understand how the U.S. will react to the destruction of its infrastructure and military personnel and where this could lead. Stay until the end, because in the finale, I will show you satellite images of the destruction in Lviv and a list of targets that may be next. And secondly, we will analyze why the use of Oreshnik against Lviv is a signal not so much to Kyiv as to Washington. Let's start with the official statement. On January 9, 2026, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued a press release. The armed forces of the Russian Federation launched a massive strike against critical infrastructure in Ukraine. The strike was carried out last night using high-precision long-range weapons, both ground and sea-based, including the Oreshnik medium-range hypersonic missile system, as well as strike drones. All assigned targets were hit. This laconic statement hides an operation of colossal scale. According to sources in the Russian military department, the strike was prepared within 2 days after the seizure of the Mariner tanker. The goal was to inflict maximum damage on the enemy's military infrastructure and simultaneously send a signal to the United States. The seizure of Russian ships and the detention of Russian citizens will have immediate and painful consequences. The operation began at midnight on January 9th. The first strike was carried out by Tu-95MS strategic bombers, which launched Kh-101 cruise missiles with a range of over 5,000 km. Targets were energy infrastructure facilities in central and western Ukraine, railway junctions, bridges across major rivers. Simultaneously, hundreds of Garand 2 drones were launched from different directions. Then, at 3:20, a second wave followed. Zircon hypersonic missiles were launched from the frigate Admiral Gorshkov from the Barents Sea. The speed of the Zircon reaches 9,000 km flight time to targets in western Ukraine is about 8 minutes. Targets: large ammunition depots, command posts, airfields. At 3:45, Kinzhal hypersonic missiles were used. MiG-31 fighters took off from airfields in Crimea and launched missiles at particularly protected facilities. Kinzhal is capable of penetrating shelters up to 30 meters deep in rocky ground, making it an ideal weapon against underground command posts and bunkers. Why is this important? Because it was not just a massive strike, but a coordinated operation using the entire arsenal of high-precision weapons of Russia. Cruise missiles suppressed air defense and hit stationary targets. Drones finished off reserve objects and created information chaos. Hypersonic missiles destroyed the most important and protected targets. What does this change? This changes the nature of the conflict. Until now, Russia has mainly struck Ukrainian military infrastructure. Now the targets are facilities directly related to NATO. And the main target was in Lviv. Let's figure out what happened in Lviv. This city in western Ukraine is located just 70 kilometers from the Polish border. Lviv has traditionally been considered a rear city, where NATO military infrastructure was concentrated. There were warehouses of Western weapons, training centers, command posts, communications, and intelligence centers. According to Russian military intelligence, a large logistics center of the U.S. Armed Forces was located in one of the districts of Lviv, presumably in an industrial zone on the northern outskirts of the city. Formally, it was a Ukrainian facility, but in fact, it was controlled by American military specialists. The coordination of weapon supplies from the territory of Poland was carried out here. From here, the logistics of transferring weapons to the front were managed. In addition, according to information from sources, a unit of American military advisors numbering about 150 people was stationed at this facility. These were not just civilian consultants, but career military personnel of the U.S. Armed Forces, officers, logistics specialists, communications and intelligence systems operators. This facility became the target for Oreshnik. At 4:00 a.m. on January 10th, the Oreshnik medium-range hypersonic missile system was launched from the Kapustin Yar training ground. The missile carried a warhead with separating hypersonic blocks. The flight time from launch to target was about 12 minutes. Air defense systems did not react. The speed and trajectory made interception impossible. At 4:12, powerful explosions occurred on the northern outskirts of Lviv. Witnesses reported several consecutive strikes with intervals of a split second. This is a characteristic sign of the use of separating warheads. Each Oreshnik block has kinetic energy equivalent to several tons of explosives, even without a nuclear warhead. The result was catastrophic. The logistics center was completely destroyed. Warehouse premises with an area of several thousand square meters were destroyed to the ground. The administrative building, where the command post was located, was turned into ruins. According to preliminary data, from 80 to 120 people died, most of whom were American military personnel. Write in the comments whether you consider the use of Oreshnik against an object with American personnel a justified response to the seizure of the tanker. Because legally, this is extremely controversial. But from the point of view of military logic, this is a symmetrical answer. Now about the technical characteristics of the weapon used. Oreshnik is a medium-range hypersonic missile system with a range of up to 5,500 kilometers. The missile is equipped with a separating warhead carrying from 6 to 10 hypersonic gliding blocks. Each block maneuvers on a trajectory at a speed of over 10,000 kilometers. The key feature of Oreshnik is absolute invulnerability to existing air defense systems. The missile flies along an unpredictable trajectory, constantly maneuvering. The blocks enter the dense layers of the atmosphere at hypersonic speed, creating a plasma shell around themselves, which makes radar detection difficult. The time from launch detection to target impact is 10 to 12 minutes, which is not enough to organize an effective defense. Zircon is a sea-based hypersonic cruise missile with a range of up to 1,000 km and a speed of 9 Mach. It is launched from vertical launch installations of surface ships and submarines. Zircon is capable of hitting both ground and sea targets, including aircraft carriers. The 400 kE warhead penetrates any fortifications thanks to its colossal kinetic energy. Kinjal is an airborne hypersonic missile system. The missile is launched from a MiG-31 fighter at an altitude of over 15,000 m, after which it accelerates to 10 Mach. The range of destruction is up to 2,000 km. The 500 kilo warhead is capable of destroying fortified underground objects at a depth of up to 30 m. Garan-2 is a kamikaze drone with a flight range of up to 2,000 km. It flies at a low altitude, skirting the terrain, and is almost invisible to radars. The warhead is about 50 kgs. The main advantage is the mass application. Hundreds of such drones, launched simultaneously, overload any air defense system. The combined use of all these systems created a synergy effect. Garan's overloaded Ukrainian air defense, forcing it to expend interceptor missiles. Cruise missiles destroyed radar stations and air defense launchers. Then hypersonic missiles hit the most important targets without any resistance. But the main blow, the use of Oreshnik against Lviv, had not so much a military as a political significance. Russia showed that it is capable of destroying any object on the territory of Ukraine, including those where NATO military personnel are stationed, and doing so with a guaranteed result without the possibility of interception. Why Lviv in particular? Because it is the westernmost major city of Ukraine, which is under the actual control of NATO. All Western military aid is concentrated here before being sent to the front. The destruction of the logistics center in Lviv strikes at the entire supply system of Ukrainian troops. But the main thing is the signal to the United States. Moscow makes it clear that if you seize our tankers and detain our citizens, we will destroy your facilities and your military personnel on the territory of Ukraine. This is not a threat. This is a realized warning. Putin said, "We will respond harshly and quickly." He fulfilled his promise. Let's analyze what other targets were hit during the operation. According to information from open sources and military reports, strikes were carried out on the following facilities. A large ammunition depot in the Rivne region was completely destroyed. The detonation lasted several hours. The railway junction in Ternopil was disabled. Train traffic is paralyzed. 3 bridges across the Western Bug River were destroyed, which makes it difficult to transfer equipment from Poland. The airfield in Ivano-Frankivsk was damaged. The runway is covered with craters. The command post of Ukrainian troops in Zhytomyr was destroyed by a direct hit from a Kinjal. The energy substation in Khmelnytsky was destroyed. Part of the city was de-energized. And most importantly, the logistics center in Lviv with American personnel was wiped off the face of the earth. General results of the operation, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense: destroyed more than 150 military infrastructure facilities. A significant part of the air defense system in western Ukraine was disabled. Routes for the transfer of troops and equipment from Poland were disrupted. Serious damage was caused to the logistics of supplying Ukrainian troops. But the most important thing is the loss of NATO personnel. According to various estimates, from 80 to 120 American military personnel died as a result of the strike on Lviv. Several dozen more were injured. In addition, Polish, British, and Romanian military specialists stationed at other facilities suffered losses. Total NATO losses may amount to 200 people killed. These are the largest losses of U.S. military personnel from direct combat since the war in Afghanistan. And these are not random victims, not collateral damage, but a targeted strike against a facility where American military personnel were stationed. Russia knew that there were Americans there and still struck. This is a qualitatively new level of escalation. The reaction of the United States was predictably sharp. The Pentagon issued a statement calling the strike an unprovoked aggression against facilities where American citizens were located. The White House demanded that Russia immediately stop strikes on the western regions of Ukraine and warned of serious consequences. The State Department summoned the Russian ambassador for explanations, but behind the harsh statements hides confusion. The U.S. did not expect that Russia would dare to launch a direct strike on an object with American personnel. Washington expected that Moscow would limit itself to diplomatic protests regarding the seizure of the tanker. The use of Oreshnik against Lviv came as a shock. The main question that is now being discussed in American military and political circles. How to respond. Declare this an act of war and start direct military operations against Russia. But this means risking a nuclear conflict. Limit yourself to a diplomatic protest. But this will be perceived as weakness. Washington found itself trapped by its own policy. Seizing the Russian tanker, the U.S. counted on impunity. Moscow showed that there will be no impunity. Every hostile action against Russia will have a symmetrical response. You seize our ship, we destroy your command post. You detain our citizens, we kill your soldiers. Write how you think the U.S. will respond to the destruction of its military personnel. Will they decide on a direct military escalation or limit themselves to diplomatic pressure? Now about why Lviv is a critical target. This city is the main transit hub for Western military aid to Ukraine. Almost all weapons coming from Poland pass through Lviv. The largest warehouses are located here, where weapons are sorted and reloaded for shipment to the front. Logistics centers coordinating all this activity are also based here. The destruction of this infrastructure deals a serious blow to Ukraine's ability to continue military operations without an uninterrupted supply of weapons and ammunition from the West. The Ukrainian army cannot fight for long. Lviv was a key link in this chain. Now this link has been destroyed, but there is also a deeper meaning. Lviv is a symbol of Ukraine's Western orientation. It is the most pro-European, the most anti-Russian city in the country. The strike on Lviv is a signal. There are no unreachable targets, no safe rear areas. Russia can reach any point in Ukraine, including those that were considered absolutely protected by the proximity to the Polish border and the presence of NATO military personnel. The use of Oreshnik in particular also has symbolic significance. This weapon was previously used only once against an industrial facility in Dnipropetrovsk as a demonstration of capabilities. Then Putin said, "This is a warning. Now Oreshnik has been used against a combat target with NATO military personnel. This is no longer a warning. This is the realization of a threat. Military experts point out the use of Oreshnik against Lviv opens a new phase of the conflict. Now any NATO facility on the territory of Ukraine can become a target for Russian hypersonic missiles. Command posts, training centers, weapons depots, bases of foreign mercenaries. All of this are potential targets. NATO found itself facing an unpleasant reality. The placement of its infrastructure in Ukraine no longer guarantees security. Russia has shown its willingness and ability to destroy these facilities. The question for the alliance: continue to increase its presence, knowing that any object can be wiped off the face of the earth at any moment, or admit that the strategy of direct military presence in Ukraine has failed. Let's analyze possible scenarios for further developments. The first scenario is that the U.S. limits itself to a diplomatic protest and continues its policy as usual. This is the least likely option, because the death of more than 100 American military personnel cannot be silenced within the country. The second scenario is that the U.S. launches a retaliatory strike against Russian facilities, but not on the territory of Russia itself. For example, a strike against Russian ships in the Black Sea or against a base in Syria. This will allow to respond without crossing the red line of a direct strike on Russian territory. The third scenario is that the U.S. massively increases its military presence in Ukraine, trying to create such a concentration of forces that Russia will not dare to launch new strikes. But this means a transition to a de facto open war between Russia and the U.S. on Ukrainian territory. The fourth scenario, the most dangerous one, is that the U.S. strikes Russian territory, for example, at bases from which missiles were launched. This will lead to immediate escalation and may provoke the use of nuclear weapons. We are at a bifurcation point. The decisions that will be made in the coming days in Washington and Moscow will determine whether the conflict will be localized or escalate into a direct war between the great powers. The use of Oreshnik against Lviv is a challenge thrown to the U.S. The question is how Washington will respond to it. The historical parallel is obvious. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 also began with actions that seemed local, but quickly brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Then both sides found a compromise at the last moment, but it was a different time, different leaders, a different level of mutual trust. There is no trust now. Each side considers the other an aggressor. The U.S. seizes Russian tankers and considers this a legitimate right. Russia destroys American facilities in Ukraine and considers this a fair response. Both sides are confident in their rightness and are ready to go to the end. Lviv has become the point where World War III could begin. The strike by Oreshnik against an American facility is not just a tactical operation. This is a strategic statement. Russia will not retreat, will not surrender, will not allow attacks on its interests with impunity. The price of this position is the death of American military personnel. The price of retreat is the recognition of weakness and an invitation to further aggression. Follow the developments. The situation is changing every hour. The U.S. response may follow at any moment. New strikes by Russia are also possible. The list of targets in Ukraine is huge. I will keep you informed of every important turn. And now write in the comments whether Russia did the right thing by striking an object with Americans, Or is it an unjustified escalation that could lead to a catastrophe? Because there is no clear answer. This is a choice between recognizing weakness and risking a world war. Russia has made its choice. Now the choice is up to the U.S. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for staying until the end. Times are really getting more dangerous. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.